Please be advised, this episode does have content that some may find distressing. As always, listener discretion is advised and it is not suitable for anyone under the age of 13.
Welcome to episode 62 of It's Murder Up North. I have been considering the direction of the show and wanting to ensure that I get a healthy work-life balance while also producing the podcast to a level that I would be happy with. Therefore, I've made the decision that going forwards, I will be releasing episodes every 2 weeks. Hopefully this way, I will be able to have a work-life balance and consistently release episodes of a good quality. And I just want to take this opportunity before I go to the episode to thank each and every one of you for continuing to support the show, especially with me being on such a long hiatus. You are all amazing, and thanks to your support and kind words, it keeps the show going. As I always say, this is a passion project. I love doing my podcast, and knowing that there are people out there who enjoy listening to it just makes it even more enjoyable. So thank you all so much for listening to the show. And now, let's head to the episode. Throughout the centuries, love has inspired artists and poets. It has healed wounds and caused conflicts. It has the power to bring out the best and worst sides of humanity. We all have a natural desire to be loved, but as they say, love is blind. It stops us seeing the flaws in others, making us unable to recognise the warning signs. Dr. Helen Fisher at Rutgers University ran a research team who determined that love can be separated into 3 distinct categories: lust, attraction, and attachment, and that the saying love is blind has more scientific backing than we thought. Quote, "When we're in love, we deactivate the neural pathways associated with negative emotions like judgment or fear. Our brains process negative and positive emotions using 2 different neural pathways, the prefrontal cortex to the nucleus accumbens for positive emotions, and nucleus accumbens to the amygdala for negative emotions. Love hormones tend to block the latter neural pathways." End quote. This affects our ability to think rationally when it comes to the loved ones in our lives. A natural human instinct is to seek out love and affection from others. However, our desire to be loved can be manipulated and twisted until love gives way to fear, isolation, and leaves us feeling trapped. For the many thousands of individuals who fall in love each year, there are fairy tale romances with happy endings, and others where they appear picture perfect until the illusion is shattered and the true nightmare begins. All Janet Scott wanted was to be loved, but sadly the man she fell in love with would be the man who would take her life. Janet Scott's life had seen its fair share of heartache. Growing up, she was one of 6 children, but her family was split apart when 4 of her siblings were placed into care, while Janet and her older sister Sue remained with their mother. Sue later recalled that "we did not have a good childhood, but we had each other." The sisters remained close into adulthood. They were in contact on a daily basis and would support one another through the many ups and downs life threw at them. There was one thing that Janet longed for in life. As Sue explained that her younger sister was looking for love, she used to say, "Why can't I get someone who is my equal?" Having seen Janet fall in love and get married, the hope that she had found her happily ever after faded as the marriage ended, and 2 subsequent marriages also ended in heartbreak. By the time she had celebrated her 50th birthday, Janet had been married 4 times and had recently separated from her 4th husband. Despite the hardships that she had faced, one thing that remained constant was Janet's love and devotion towards her children, with Sue describing what a wonderful mother Janet was, stating she adored her children. She had 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls. She was always supportive of the children and wanted to give them everything she could. In April 2017, having separated from her husband, Janet joined her sister for a drink in the Coach and Horses pub, a small traditional pub in the heart of Nottingham city centre, with a friendly and cosy atmosphere. While the sisters sat at a table in a quiet corner of the bar, they were approached by a man with sandy brown hair and hazel eyes. He introduced himself to the two ladies, and after chatting to them, his attention became focused on the newly single Janet. And by the end of the night, the two had exchanged numbers and agreed to meet again. Sue had her reservations regarding this newcomer. Looking back on her initial impressions, she stated, "I was not impressed. I did not like the look of him. I told her she needed to spend some time on her own." Despite her older sister's words of concern, Janet soon found herself falling for the man she had met in the pub. He was charming and thoughtful. He showered her with gifts and affection, and he made her feel wanted. Shortly after the pair had started dating, the new suitor surprised Janet as she finished her shift at the local hospital. He was waiting for her outside with a bunch of flowers and an Easter egg. As Janet's feelings grew, new details emerged about her love interest. She learned that he had been abroad for some time and owned 2 properties in Spain. He also alleged that he had his own business, which had become fairly successful and enabled him to live a life of comfort and security. This supposedly successful businessman went on to try to persuade Janet to leave her role at the hospital in order to work for him. The relationship developed quickly, and within a matter of weeks they were practically living together. And Janet admitted to Sue, quote, "He comes round and thinks he lives at my house. He has moved himself in. He goes shopping with me and puts stuff in my trolley and makes me pay for it." She said, "I am fed up with this." Despite protesting that she was getting frustrated with the situation, Janet couldn't tear herself away from the man she was becoming increasingly smitten with. He was doing little things that annoyed her, but her love for him overpowered these things. Initially, Janet's 15-year-old son Josh was glad to see his mum content, stating, quote, "This new man, he was very timid and quiet. He claimed to have a successful business and villas in Spain, and he could jet my mum away. That's what my mum needed. It was a weight off my chest, but he was playing his cards wisely. He took residency in the house and changed things. Where the plates were, the crisps, even the tea towels. I thought money had made him eccentric." Janet's feelings would however be tested when she learned some new details about her new partner. First of all, she learned that he was not a successful businessman who owned villas in Spain. He actually lived in a small flat and made a living making and selling car number plates from home. But worse details were still to come. When she learned that this man, who she had fallen head over heels in love with, had a dark past, which he confessed to about 8 weeks into their relationship. He told her that he had lied about where he had been for the last 12 years, admitting that he had been in prison during this time. Janet was stunned by this news, but was horrified when she was told that he had been found guilty of murdering his ex-partner, in what he claimed was a moment of madness, with the trial judge concluding that he had been suffering from depression and stress at the time of the murder, and that the defendant had not shown violent tendencies prior to the incident. Torn between feelings of love and disgust, Janet confided in her sister Sue during a phone call. Sue recounted the conversation, quote, "Janet said, 'Are you sitting down? I've got something to tell you. He is under a probation officer for murder. When we heard what he had done, I said, you ought to be careful.' Sue continued by warning Janet, stating, 'You need to keep away from him.' But she said everyone deserves a second chance." Janet also told her daughter Amelia about his past, sending her articles related to the case. Amelia recalled, "Mum was too deeply in love by then and believed she was safe because he underplayed his convictions. When she sent me the links to his conviction, I went hysterical and called her and said, 'Mum, you can't do this. He's going to kill you too.' A clear and rational mind would tell someone to flee from danger. However, a mind confused by manipulation and feelings of love can cause them to ignore the warning signs, and this man had already begun to control Janet's thoughts and actions. He convinced her that he had changed, that prison had rehabilitated him, and that he would never hurt her. Janet's brother-in-law Keith believed that there was also another reason why she stayed in the relationship. Quote, "I think she just did not want to be alone. He was there and he did the right thing at the right time, and she was estranged from her husband at the time. It was a moment of weakness that cost her her life." However, the mother of 6 did have her own uncertainties regarding the relationship, and while on holiday with her sister, Janet confided in Sue that she planned to end it. She was feeling suffocated by his controlling nature and exhausted by the constant arguments. But her resolve was quickly worn away by her partner's persistence. Each time she gathered the strength to try and walk away, he would work his way back into her life. And each time they got back together, her family grew increasingly concerned by the level of control he held over Janet's life. Sue remembered, quote, "There was a point where I could not speak to my own sister when he was about. I would text her at night, but she would say, 'She can't speak.' He would also answer the phone for her. He was controlling her. He had been stalking her, waiting outside her house, or turning up at work. She had finished it, but he kept wearing her down and texting her." On January the 12th, 2018, Janet sent her partner a text message in an attempt to finally bring an end to the relationship. The contents of this message were reported by the Sun newspaper, quote, "I've been trying to talk to you, but the words don't come. I'm not happy. I want us to be friends. I feel trapped by your conviction and rules. I want us to stop, please. I don't want a future anymore. I want to be me again." With a renewed determination, Janet attempted to move on with her life. She had reconnected with her husband and had been trying to work on rekindling their relationship. But the dark shadow lingered, with a constant barrage of texts. She also found herself being stalked, with her ex standing outside her home at 4 o'clock in the morning, and waiting in the car park for her when she finished work. On the 28th of January, Sue spoke to Janet on the phone, and recalled how she was happy to finally be leaving the last 9 months behind her, speaking of the positive steps she had taken in the previous couple of weeks, and how she was hoping to reconcile with her husband. The upbeat call ended with the sisters bidding each other good night. It would be the last time the sisters spoke, as the following day, as Monday morning rush hour in the city of Nottingham began to ease, reports began to emerge of a road traffic collision on a side street close to the city centre. The tree-lined Peel Street consisted primarily of apartments and accommodation for students from the university, and it was due to this that it was often a busy route. However, on that morning the street fell silent, as police cordoned off the junction at Peel Street and North Sherwood Street, as they responded to reports that a pedestrian had been struck by a car. For officers arriving at the scene, they were met with the sight of 2 severely injured individuals lying on the ground, one of whom was already determined to be deceased, while a third person was trapped inside a Volkswagen Golf, which had been pinned between a wall and a tree. As an ambulance drove the injured man, who had been lying about 100 feet from the crash site, to the hospital, the fire brigade worked on freeing the wounded individual in the car, and investigations began into what was now being treated as a fatal collision. As assessments were made of the area to determine what had caused the incident, officers began canvassing the area for eyewitnesses and surveillance footage from surrounding buildings. A picture began to emerge as investigators learned that an emergency call had been placed prior to the time of the collision, during which the caller advised that there was a woman in a distressed state who had been stabbed. It would become evident that this had been reported by a council community protection officer who had encountered the woman and had radioed his office to request an ambulance while he attempted to assist the injured party. When police were able to view the surveillance footage, they were provided with a clear view of the horrific incident, and what they witnessed would haunt them. As they watched the events unfold, they observed the council protection officer administering first aid to the wounded individual. Sergeant Holmes would later testify to the woman's condition, quote, "You can see the injuries start to take their toll. She starts to rest against the wall at the junction of Peel Street and North Sherwood Street." What followed was deemed so horrific that it has been removed from the footage. But Sergeant Holmes could still recall the shocking moment when the VW Golf is seen purposely driving towards the two individuals on the pavement, striking them both, the impact causing the council protection officer to be thrown through the air and the car continuing until it came to rest between the wall and a tree trunk. These were the final moments of Janet Scott's life, and her assailant had been the man she had ended a relationship with just 2 weeks prior, and he would be named by the press as 56-year-old Simon Mellors. The investigation was now being treated as a murder inquiry, with it being apparent that Janet had suffered a serious attack, during which she had been stabbed twice and subsequently died from what Jonathan Straw, the assistant coroner, described as catastrophic injuries in the most horrific of circumstances. The 35-year-old Farhad Ashfaq, the community protection officer who had been seriously injured when struck by the car, told police that he had been located on a car park adjacent to Peel Street when he witnessed Janet exiting the VW Golf and running across the road towards him. He stated that Janet was, quote, distressed, crying and clearly extremely frightened. Farhad continued by stating, "She said I'd been stabbed," and described how the woman proceeded to show him the wounds under her t-shirt. He then advised, quote, "As she spoke to me, she pointed to a male from the other side of North Sherwood Street. She identified him as being responsible." As she identified her assailant, Simon Mellors, who had gotten out of his car, he retreated back to the vehicle and proceeded to drive away. Realizing the serious situation he had been confronted with, the community protection officer radioed for assistance, before commencing to administer first aid. As he unravelled a bandage to place on the wounds, he was unaware of the vehicle speeding towards him, recalling that, "The last thing I remember is being stood next to her." While investigations continued, all efforts to speak to the suspect were met with a wall of silence, as Mellors refused to answer any of the detectives' questions. But despite this, they were able to piece together what had occurred that morning. Officers recovered footage that revealed that Mellors had driven to Nursery Road in Arnold, where Janet lived, and had parked up at 5 to 7 that morning, just down the street from her house, where he had the perfect line of sight to her front door. The 56-year-old left the area and was then seen entering a supermarket at about 20 past 8, where he purchased a birthday card, before returning to Nursery Road, where he once again sat watching Janet's house. Observing her son leave the property at 25 past 9, Mellors made his move. What occurred next is uncertain. However, it is suspected that Mellors gained entry to the home either by coercion or force. He proceeded to attack Janet in the bedroom of the property, stabbing her twice, and from the blood evidence at the crime scene it was clear that Janet had made an attempt to escape, with bloody handprints found on the walls and furniture. It is believed that Mellors then forced the 51-year-old into his car and commenced the journey south towards his flat on North Sherwood Street in Nottingham. Approximately 4 miles into this journey, Janet seized the opportunity to flee from the car and seek help. It was evident to all those involved in the case that the mother of 6, who was due to become a grandmother for the second time, had died at the hands of a man who had filled her final moments with fear and pain. Simon Mellors was charged with causing the death of Janet Scott, and he was sent to await trial at Strangeways Prison in Manchester. But he would never be brought to justice, as on the 25th of February 2018, less than a month since the murder, Mellors was found deceased in his cell, having taken his own life. This final act of control left Janet's loved ones with unanswered questions, and the devastating knowledge that he would not be punished for murdering her. Their distress was increased further when subsequent inquests into the death of Janet were postponed, only proceeding at the beginning of 2021. When the inquest finally began, it not only delved into Janet Scott's horrific final moments, but the catalogue of events that led up to her murder, and a key focus fell on how the probation service had handled Simon Mellors since his release from prison in 2014. In the years since Janet's murder, details emerged regarding Mellors' prior conviction for the murder of his partner, 36-year-old Pearl Black, in 1999, for which he was ordered to serve just 12 years, despite the brutality of the crime. Pearl had met Simon when her daughter Carmel was just 3 years old, and over the next 9 years the couple would welcome another little girl. However, despite appearances to the outside world, their relationship was far from perfect, with Pearl often telling her family that Mellors had been violent towards her. Choosing to break her silence and speak out against the effects of domestic abuse, particularly on children, Carmela told Nottinghamshire Live, "I remember there was a lot of shouting and a lot of police coming around quite often, being told to stay in my room or to stay away. I remember sitting at the top of the stairs and seeing what was going on. He was not very nice at all. He used to control my mum and used to make her feel fat and ugly. He broke her down. She was such a beautiful woman with an aura about her. He used to hide the keys so she could not leave the house, and then find them when he got home. He would do the same with the bank cards. He took all her confidence away." Carmel recalled, roughly 4 years into the relationship, her mother had summoned the courage to leave Mellors, and recalled the role refuges played in her young life. Quote, "I just remember being woken up in the middle of the night and told to get dressed, and being taken to a refuge in Nottingham city centre. Places like that are really important. I remember playing with other kids, and you could hear the fear in the women there. It helped my mum get an escape and speak to other people and get advice. It was because of this experience that as an adult, Carmel does what she can to support the important work that refugees undertake. But for Carmel, she witnessed how manipulative an abusive partner can be. And when Mellors used the death of his mother to work his way back into Pearl's life, playing on her caring and empathetic nature to encourage her to rekindle their relationship, his coercion worked, and soon Mellors was once again living with Pearl and her 2 children. And Carmel noticed the effect that this had on her mother. Quote, "The worst part was just seeing my mum so helpless. You could see her change. She became nervous, and she wasn't that person." Over the course of their 9-year relationship, Pearl did not only attempt to break ties with Mellors, but she also took out restraining orders against him on 2 separate occasions. But each time he was able to re-enter her life. The exact details related to Pearl's death are dependent on whose version of events one chooses to listen to. According to her family, the 36-year-old mother of 2 had made the decision to end the relationship, yet she wanted to remain on friendly terms due to their children. Pearl was, according to some reports, in the process of leaving Mellors when she was killed, whereas Mellors alleges that he and Pearl had been out drinking on the 5th of May 1999, and while under the influence of alcohol, Pearl had confessed to having an affair, which had caused the already mentally fragile Mellors to snap. He claimed he'd lost his temper and struck Pearl about the head with an iron bar, before strangling the mum of 2, while her daughters were sleeping in the room next door. Her brother, George Black, would later recollect, quote, "Pearl's body was so unrecognisable. There were 68 wounds on her body, where she had been hit, and it had to be a closed coffin." In the morning following the murder, Mellors proceeded like nothing was wrong. even getting the children ready for the day, telling them that their mother was still asleep. He proceeded to drive them to school, with the youngsters completely unaware that he had murdered their mother just a few hours earlier. Having driven the children to school, Mellors then proceeded to Beeston, where he attempted suicide by drinking beer and ingesting slug pellets. His attempt failed and he was arrested for the murder later that same day. George Black would later reflect on his sister's death, quote, "Pearl's last moments on this earth were the most horrific. My life has been changed forever because of this. I have been diagnosed with severe clinical depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. Until this had happened, I was in full-time employment. My depression gets so bad at times I can't get out of bed for days at a time. This has cost me my health and my marriage, and any real quality of life now. Our whole family was fragmented and torn apart by what Mellors did and its aftermath. Our lives have been cast to the four winds. Our sorrow and deepest pain is with us every day. Pearl is never ever coming back to us and her two girls. We are living the real and true life sentence, and there's no earliest date of release for us. Pearl will never be coming home. We were not even given a chance of a last kiss, a hug, or even to say goodbye because of the brutal and savage way he had murdered our Pearl." Despite pleas from Pearl Black's family that if he was released, Mellors would strike again, including numerous impassioned letters from her brother George, in which he stated, "This man is very intelligent, very calculated, very deviant, and a very, very malevolent individual. Be prepared. His game is far from over. Simon Mellors is a very real danger to any woman who he strikes up any relationship with on his release. He will play the prison and parole system, so please be aware. Mellors will try and manipulate and convince those who hold the keys to his freedom, the parole board. Mellors will play the model prisoner and use any situation to obtain any advantage to gain early release." The parole board, however, decided that the offender was eligible for release on licence, with a number of restrictions in place. These included reporting to a probation officer on a monthly basis, and notifying any future partner of his prior conviction. At the inquest in 2021, the court was advised of Mellors' relationships since he had been released from prison. Under the terms of his release, he had to inform any new partner of his criminal history, and it was reported that when he had discussed the information to two previous partners, both of them had ended the relationship before it developed into something serious. The court heard that at the end of 2014, Mellors had begun a relationship with a woman he had met while looking for work. It was discovered in an independent review into the probation service's handling of the case that key information related to this woman was not on record. The only details they possessed was her first name, her address, and the fact she had a young child. This failure was exacerbated by the fact that throughout the 3-month relationship, the woman was not contacted by the probation service, and there was nothing to confirm that she had been advised about Mellors' past. The head of the independent review, Claire Barmer, criticised this lack of thorough checks, stating, "You are not accurately managing the risk if you don't do these checks." The relationship lasted just 12 weeks, and by March 2015, Mellors had met another woman. This individual did receive a call from the probation service who had told her about her new partner's past. This partner had ended the relationship, but Mellors persisted in attempting to get her to change her mind. The woman complained that Mellors displayed, quote, "lecherous behaviour," that he had been touching her without consent, was harassing her at her flat, and had kicked the door in and growled at her. His alarming behaviour even caught the attention of the members of the church the woman attended. The congregation witnessed Mellors arrive at the service she was attending, and his presence clearly upset her. Fearing for her well-being, this incident was reported to the probation service. In accordance with the terms of his licence, any breach of his parole conditions would result in him being sent back to prison. However, on this occasion, Mellors was given a warning regarding his behaviour and was banned from making contact with the woman. He did not adhere to this, as shortly after the meeting he sent her a birthday card, but this breach was not treated seriously. In November 2016, Mellors started a relationship with a woman from a dating site. It was noted by the probation officer that the parolee had been advised to inform the woman about the criminal record. However, there was no further notes regarding whether Mellors had disclosed this information, and no record of who the woman was. It may have been possible that the relationship ceased soon after Mellors' meeting with his parole officer, and thus the woman was never informed, and it was deemed that no further action was required. The independent review concluded that these women had been put at unnecessary risk, with the probation officer aware that rejection had been a major factor in Mellors' previous offences. The officer therefore should have been more vigilant in regards to Mellors' relationships. There should have been better guidance in terms of when the board should be notified of a new partner, and when Mellors' prior convictions should be disclosed. The review stated, quote, "They were very dangerous times for all these women, but a stark lack of structure and focus on the part of the offender manager meant that Mellors was in effect able to act with impunity." In reference to the parole officer, the board chief stated, "He missed an opportunity for police to intervene, and it would have sent a message to Mr. Mellors that any issue in a relationship would be treated seriously." Although Mellors did make Janet aware of his past and would dutifully attend his monthly meetings with his probation officer, Simon Mellors still posed a risk to his partner, a fact which, following the death of Janet Scott, George Black lamented, telling a reporter for the Nottingham Post, quote, "I warned them, and what is the outcome? He has destroyed another family. She had 6 kids, and he has destroyed them all, the whole fabric of that family. It is unbelievable. He is a demon. Everything he did was monstrous." The probation service failed her. They failed her miserably, and the judicial system. You can rob a bank and get 25 years for it, but you murder someone and just get standard time. Life has little value under the judicial system. End quote. The role of the probation service would become a major focus of the inquest into the death of Janet Scott and the events that led to the tragic events of January 29, 2018. Within weeks of their relationship starting, it was noted that Simon had all but moved himself into Janet's home and had already begun to show his controlling side. He constantly wanted to know where Janet had been and who she had been with. He didn't like her being away from him too long. And this caused arguments when it came to Janet wanting to go on holiday. He was paranoid that Janet would rekindle her relationship with her estranged husband, and alleged that he was unable to sleep without her beside him. Janet admitted to her family that she felt like she was being suffocated by Mellors' behaviour, and that she wanted to end the relationship, but each time she tried, he would find another way to change her mind. It emerged that Janet had been receiving treatment with a psychologist to help her overcome a childhood trauma. And Mellors often used this and the fact that she had suffered from depression to convince Janet that these sessions were partly why she thought she needed to break up with him, that her negative thoughts about him had been planted by her psychiatrist, making her believe he was not good for her. Janet's family members testified to her state of mind in the months prior to her death, with the inquest hearing that the deceased had been suffering from severe anxiety and depression and had attempted suicide in August of 2017, which her older sister Sue claimed that Mellors' overbearing behaviour had been a contributing factor. It was at this time that the probation service were contacted by a mental health nurse who had been treating Janet, and had become increasingly concerned for the patient's well-being and the controlling behaviour that Mellors had exhibited. This included him having her name tattooed on his chest, and Mellors insisting that Janet did the same. It was this coercive and manipulative behaviour which factored into Janet requiring treatment. However, this report did not have any effect on raising Mellor's threat level, which in turn meant that the police were not notified, which would have led to Mellors being sent back to prison. Sue continued by stating Janet could not breathe. He would be wherever she was. If she wanted to lie down on the bed, he would follow her. Despite this controlling and manipulative behaviour, Janet's daughter would later state that her mum had not suffered physically at the hands of Mellors, and up until the end of the relationship at the beginning of January 2018, Janet had not had cause to really fear her partner. This would all change when Janet told Mellors it was over. She had waited until the new year to tell him, as according to her family she didn't want him to be alone over the festive season. But as 2018 dawned, Janet finally broke up with Mellors and planned on returning to her estranged husband. Janet's daughter Amelia recalled her mum telling Mellors, quote, "This is a clean slate now. We can be friends and we can talk, but I don't want to be with you." Although she had had cause to fear him previously, Janet had now fallen into the most dangerous stage for anyone who has experienced domestic abuse, the end of a relationship. It is reported that the first 3 months after the abuser's partner decides to leave are the most dangerous, as this is the time when their abuser is most volatile. They are no longer able to control the situation, and it is usually this loss of power that causes the abuser to take sometimes fatal action. It started with small things. He was reluctant to return property that belonged to Janet, and when he would come around to the house to return items, Janet insisted that a member of her family were there, as she did not wish to be alone with Mellors. By 2018, Janet was working at a local supermarket, and it was here that she had begun to feel like someone was watching her, and soon she realised that it was Mellors. On one occasion, having finished work at 4 o'clock in the morning, she noticed him staring at her, and when she reached her home, she told her daughter, "I had this horrible, horrible feeling. If I hadn't turned around and seen him looking at me, would he have done something?" Janet would go on to raise a complaint with the probation service regarding Mellors' behaviour, with her complaint stating that he had been waiting for her outside her workplace and home. She had also been receiving constant calls and messages from him, despite the fact she had told him to leave her alone. These claims were backed up at the inquest by a number of Janet's neighbours, who had reported seeing a man loitering close to her address in the days prior to the murder. Janet made several attempts to report Mellors' behaviour. Her frantic phone conversations to the parole officer were witnessed by her family, who overheard her pleading to know what they could do to help keep him away from her. But she was walking on a double-edged sword. If she reported the behaviour, she risked Mellors being sent back to prison and upon his release, seeking her out to exact revenge. Yet despite her concerns and the potential risk posed to Janet's life, the probation service failed to act. It wasn't just the stalking that Janet had to endure, as Mellors began sending her threatening messages, claiming he was going to kill her and her estranged husband. Again, this was reported to the probation service, but nothing was done. Becoming increasingly concerned for her safety, and that of her family, Janet tried to get her children out of harm's way, going to the extent of insisting that her eldest children didn't return home from university, and sending her younger children to live with relatives where she hoped they would be safe. The true extent of her fear was highlighted in the messages Janet and Mellors exchanged in the days leading up to the murder. In one, Janet wrote, "I have told the probation officer the truth. You scared me, Simon. You made me scared for my life." Mellors was unable to accept that the relationship was over, and bombarded Janet with messages, asking her to take him back, insisting they could still be friends, and telling her how much he loved her and didn't want to lose her. In response to his desperate pleas, Janet stated, quote, "I can't. I need a clean break. No way back, please. When you bring the rest of my things, we say goodbye." As the hiding persisted, Janet advised that she would report his behaviour to the police. But nothing seemed to deter him from trying to win her back, and the fact that Janet remained steadfast in her determination to move on from the relationship only angered Mellors further. He lamented to his friend that she had, quote, made him look a fool again, and tried to get his feelings reciprocated by Janet by emotional coercion, telling her that he would be nothing without her. All these correspondences showed a man who was becoming increasingly desperate to regain control, and that his behaviour also demonstrated the typical traits associated with stalking. However, this again would not be picked up by the probation officer responsible for monitoring Mellors. Janet's daughter Amelia reported to the inquest how her mum had behaved in those final few weeks before she was murdered, stating, "My mum was stressed by her relationship with him and could not cope. He was stressing her out and his behaviour was controlling. My mum was proud and did not like people to see she was hurting. Her rationale of not calling the police was that she did not want to be responsible for sending him back to prison. She is just too kind-hearted and will look at the good in people. She wanted to convince herself it was a breakdown, and that is why he committed the first murder, but she knew there was something not right." Despite Mellors' increasingly alarming behaviour being reported to the probation service, these complaints were not acted on, leaving Janet's family attempting to protect her however they could, with them meeting her after work and limiting the amount of time she was at home alone. But on that Monday, Mellors saw an opportunity and took it. The family and the coroner at the inquest were very critical of the manner in which Mellors' case had been handled by the probation service. In particular, the role of the probation officer assigned to monitor him, Mr. Victors, who would be called to testify on January 27, 2021. His testimony would encompass the entirety of Mr. Victor's time working with Mellors, and what safeguarding measures were in place to protect those who were potentially at risk by being associated with him. As part of the terms of his release, Mellors had to keep the probation service informed not only of any new relationships, but provide details of whether he would be staying at his new partner's address overnight. It was revealed that Mr. Andrew Victor had authorised Mellors to sleep at Janet's house, despite the fact he had not received clarification that Mellors had disclosed his conviction to her. Mr. Victors told the inquest that he had been notified by Mellors via text message on the 16th of May that Janet had been advised of his past. However, the probation officer failed to follow up on this. Jonathan Straw, the coroner overseeing the inquest, questioned Mr. Victor regarding the reason why he failed to check, to which the probation officer stated he believed it was due to the volume of work he was managing. The coroner proceeded to ask, quote, "You don't know whether Mellors had made any disclosure about his past offending. You are sanctioning him to stay at the address before it is disclosed and before you have spoken to Janet, and have no knowledge of the circumstances." Mr. Victors responded with a simple yes. It would be 2 weeks after Mellors sent the text claiming he had disclosed his conviction to Janet that Mr. Victors first met her, when she attended the probation offices. Following this meeting, Mr. Victor visited Janet's home address and concluded that he would not allow Mellors to move into the property. He also rejected a request for the couple to go on holiday abroad, citing his reason as the potential breakdown of the relationship. Mr. Victor stated that he had noticed that the relationship between Janet and Mellors had been intense from the beginning, and it was clear that things were progressing quickly between them. Given the pace and intensity of the couple's relationship, Andrew Victor advised that he had provided Janet with his contact details and told her that if any issues arose, she should call him. When asked if Janet had been in touch with any concerns, Mr. Victor confirmed that she had been in contact with him in August of 2017. He recalled she asked, quote, "Do you think he will re-offend? I need to know your opinion. It is my life too." The parole officer told the court that he had told her, "No, I don't think he will." When Mr. Victor was notified regarding the end of the relationship in January 2018, he recalled that Mellors claimed the probation officer was partially to blame for the collapse, due to the fact that he had not allowed the couple to go on holiday together, which apparently had caused problems between the pair. Mr. Victor told the court he was fixated on this foreign holiday, that if we had given him permission, that would have made all the difference with Janet. If he can magic this part, everything will be all right. Despite being aware that the relationship had ended and the circumstances surrounding Mellors' prior conviction, Mr. Victor failed to contact Janet to inquire about her welfare, meaning he was unaware if she was at risk. He only learned of her concerns on January the 19th, 2018, 10 days before the murder took place, when Janet placed a call to the probation office to make a complaint regarding Mellors' behaviour, advising that, quote, "He keeps hanging around here and approached me on the last 2 mornings on my way to work at 4 a.m. When asked how he responded to this information, he recalled Janet stating that, quote, "She did not feel at risk, but felt uncomfortable." Mr. Victors then claimed he had told her that if Mellors' behaviour began to make her feel at risk, that she should contact the police. He then told the court that he followed this conversation by speaking to Mellors and advising him that he was no longer allowed to see or speak to Janet, and explained that this would be discussed at their monthly meeting. Mr. Straw responded critically to the actions taken by the probation officer, quote, "There is a number of incidents where he was turning up at her place of work, or followed her, or appeared in some form or another, following her in the dark to make his presence known. Did you ever think it might be appropriate to change his risk assessment, or involve other agencies, or inform them of what you knew?" Mr. Victor replied, "I could have contacted the police. I could have initiated a recall. I could have told Mellors he would get an informed warning for his behaviour. At that time, my assessment was of someone who had done a lot of work in custody. His compliance had always been perfect." The coroner then asked Mr. Victor would he have done anything differently in retrospect, to which the witness said, "I think I should have spoken to a manager and recorded that, and I should have contacted the police, at the very least to notify them about his behaviour." It was revealed that Mr. Victor had worked for the probation service for over 15 years, and due to his handling of this case he was suspended from his duties, pending a disciplinary. It was decided that the charges against him could not be proven. It was later disclosed to the BBC that Mr. Victor, quote, "is no longer in a role supervising offenders in the community." In relation to Janet Scott's death, the inquest explored a number of issues in how Mellors was managed. They pinpointed some key failings, including the fact that despite several reports and clear evidence of Mellors' controlling behaviour, there appeared to be no clear way in which the probation service intended to handle the situation, in terms of monitoring, safeguarding, and what actions would be taken in the event of a breach of Mellors' terms of release. The probation service were also advised that Mellors, being seen in close proximity to Janet's home and workplace, could be seen as stalking, and when taken into account with the fact that Janet also complained about Mellor, action should have been taken. When asked why this hadn't been taken seriously, Mr. Victor claimed that he saw the incidents as a form of harassment, but due to a lack of training, he did not deem it to be stalking behaviour. Mr. Victors did warn Mellors to stop all contact with Janet, yet failed to express the consequences of what would happen should he breach his licence. He also did not put anything in place to ensure the safety of Janet Scott, despite the signs that Mellors' behaviour was mirroring those which he exhibited prior to Pearl Black's death. A number of individuals had expressed their concerns regarding the relationship between Mellors and Janet, particularly after they split up. However, there was a lack of communication between the probation service and other agencies that may have been able to assist in the handling of Mellors' case. The main failings were identified as being that the probation service, quote, did not consider raising the level of his supervision by involving other agencies, particularly the police, and that, quote, several significant opportunities to intervene in respect of domestic abuse were missed. It was identified procedures were either not in place or had not been followed, and there was not an open line of communication between all agencies with a clear escalation process to ensure that complaints are followed up on and appropriately actioned. It was also discussed that the probation service had been suffering with staff shortages, which led to officers handling more cases than they could effectively manage, meaning that key information and opportunities to act were missed. Reflecting on the role Mr. Victor played and the increased workload, Coroner Mr. Straw stated that the cases Mr. Victor was handling were, quote, significantly higher than it should have been, and that he had complained to bosses that he was overwhelmed and stressed. I am not of the view that work pressures affected or contributed to the failure of Mr. Victor to escalate risk during the critical period. It's undoubtedly impacted to a degree on early decisions and assessments. The coroner went on to conclude that, quote, if you start looking at all these cases, there's planning, determination, there's always coercive control. With the benefit of hindsight, it is clear that a number of opportunities were missed by the offender manager during the critical period. This is when the imminent risk that Simon Mellors presented to Janet should have been both realised and acted upon. These missed opportunities have, on the balance of probability, made a significant contribution to Janet's death. However, he stated, direct responsibility for Mrs. Scott's death sits solely and squarely with Simon Mellors. In 2018, Janet Scott was one of 3 people who were murdered by someone who had been convicted of a serious offence, who had subsequently been paroled. This naturally raised questions about the probation service and its ability to monitor those individuals. In response to these incidents, the probation service stated, prisoners released under supervision face strict conditions, and fewer than 0.5% of them go on to be convicted of a serious crime. However, this offers little comfort to the loved ones of those who have lost their lives, with the families calling out for more to be done to prevent others suffering the same grief that they have had to endure. In a study conducted by Dr. Monckton Smith, she reviewed the circumstances surrounding the deaths of women who had been killed by their partner. The details of these women can be found on the website Counting Dead Women. Statistics show that approximately 80% of domestic homicides are committed by a male against a female partner. Through her work, Dr. Monckton Smith identified 8 key similarities between nearly all of the 372 cases, which she has urged all agencies involved in tackling domestic violence to be more aware of, and to take action should they recognise a pattern. These are the 8 stages that were identified. A pre-relationship history of stalking or abuse by the perpetrator. The romance developing quickly into a serious relationship. The relationship becoming dominated by coercive control. A trigger to threaten the perpetrator's control. For example, the relationship ends or the perpetrator gets into financial difficulty. Escalation, an increase in the intensity or frequency of the partner's control tactics, such as by stalking or threatening suicide. The perpetrator has a change in thinking, choosing to move on either through revenge or homicide. Planning. The perpetrator might buy weapons or seek opportunities to get the victim alone. Homicide. The perpetrator kills his or her partner and possibly hurts others, such as the victim's children. Anyone can become a victim of domestic abuse, and tragically too many people are losing their lives at the hands of a partner, someone they hoped would love and cherish them, and bring joy to their lives. No one expects for their dreams of finding love to become a horrendous nightmare. It is vital that not only do the relevant agencies recognise the signs that someone is in an abusive relationship, but that we are aware of the signs, so we may one day help save someone's life. All Janet Scott and Pearl Black wanted was to be loved, a basic human desire that cost them their lives. If you or someone you know have been affected by domestic abuse, there is help available, and I will be providing a link to these in the show notes. Thank you for joining me for episode 61 of It's Murder Up North. Episode 62 will be available in 2 weeks. So in the meantime, keep an eye on those shadows.